In this slideshow, we're going to talk about the idea generation process, branding, and logos. So before designing, there is a core branding idea. That's the idea that imbues a brand or a group with character and differentiates it from other brands and builds a relationship with the audience. Robin Landa, who's a famous writer on branding, says, "The one sure thing is that critical and creative thinking will always be necessary. Ideas matter, no matter what the technology used." So beyond making a brand look pretty with colors and logos and cool fonts and so on, branding identifies and distinguishes a company. So you need to figure out, why would someone want to associate with your brand? Some ideas are things like differentiation. So how is the brand characterized? Its visual and verbal identity. Relevance. What makes the brand relevant to the audience? Usefulness. So for example, there are brands that provide charging stations at airports. Storytelling. Does the brand have a good backstory? Unity. You have to have unity across all kinds of media, on and offline. And then brands can provide people with an opportunity to share a common experience and to communicate with both each other and with the brand, especially on social media, things like Instagram, of course, influencers being really important to that today. I like this quote, also from Robin Landa. "Anybody who is honest about consumer behavior knows that often what we buy is not simply something that we need, but an idea that is embodied by that thing." So this is why things like trends happen. It is why you don't just need a pair of jeans, you need a specific brand or a specific style. So it's not so much that you just are in need of a pair of pants, but you like what those particular pants embody, which is trendiness or, I don't know, a certain characteristic that you want to be like. So another example that I always think about is water bottles. So anybody can use just about anything to carry water and drink water, like a plastic bottle will do. But it seems like every few years a new water bottle comes out. There were like the Nalgene bottles and the Swells and Hydro Flasks, and people will pay like 40 or 50 bucks for these. So it's not so much, again, about the fact that you need a water bottle. These embody certain ideas about ourselves that we want to embrace. So what are some of these embodiments that brands take on? There are some common or famous ones that are listed in textbooks on branding. So there is, I apologize for this very wordy slide, but I wanted to fit it all on one. So yeah, most brands have a big idea. They hang their hat on a certain overall big idea. So there's the gold standard. So a brand being like the benchmark of quality. And we'll go through a couple of examples after reading through these. The authority. A brand that is like the authority on a certain product. Origin. So maybe focusing on the country from which a brand or a group comes. I always think of like Foster's beer. They focus on the fact that it's from Australia. Original. Being the first. Spirit. Characterizing a brand with a certain force or a sense of self, things like enthusiasm or energy or state of mind. Irony, poking fun at ads. I think that Old Spice does this sometimes. Attitude could be anything, like arrogant or mannered or wry or irreverent. Exclusive, so belonging to some kind of exclusive group. This makes me think of credit cards or airline clubs or things like that. Rugged individualism, so this is like a virtue of self-reliance. Wholesomeness, so like clean living. Common sense, a virtuous lifestyle. Family, but just like my grandma used to do, I also think of Werther's Original, both in the wholesome and family categories, because there's always a little kid sitting on his grandpa's lap and they're sharing this Werther's Original candy. Rebellion or nonconformity. And then there could just be like environmental values or certain values that are important to certain people. For example, Dawn dish soap embodies this environmental branding strategy with a little ducky. Motorcycle companies like Harley Davidson, maybe the rugged individualism or the nonconformity, rebellious types of characteristics. I think this one's kind of maybe irony or humor, a brand that's, I don't know if that's the actual brand name or just the tagline, but you smell soap. Coca-Cola, certainly like the original and wholesome and a number of things. So what about your favorite brand? What's their characteristic or their identity? One of my favorite brands is Patagonia, and they have a value of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like upcycling and, not, there's a word for this that I can't think of right now, but not throwing your clothes away all the time. So they will fix your clothes if you send them in, and they have ads that say, don't buy this coat, fix your old coat, and that type of thing. So that's something that they embody and I appreciate, and they actually kind of live by that, which is great. And let's talk about how do we come up with these branding ideas. There are a number of ways that people come up with ideas, and none of them are often this linear, but here's kind of a rough way that ideas might come to mind for designers. So there's preparation. That's all about research and creating what's called the creative brief, which we'll talk about next. Then there's brainstorming, something called thumbnail sketches. Then you're creating rough drafts. And then there's this thing called incubation, where you kind of step away from everything for a while and you let it percolate or marinate, or you're not like really thinking about it, but it's in the back of your mind. And then you kind of come back to it and see it with fresh eyes, and that's when the comprehensive hopefully is created, or the final draft. So in terms of that first step, the preparation, the big thing here is creating a creative brief. So let's talk about what that is. It's a document that's going to be both creative and brief. It's going to be the result of an interview with a client where you're going to get a lot of information. It helps you develop a contract with the client about what their expectations are, what your ideas are, and here's how that all is going to come together. It helps you think bigger and more deeply about your client. You want to know everything about your client. And it also helps you link your creative side with the goals of the client, and lets the client be heard. So some things you want to find out in this creative brief interview process. Obviously, what's the project? What's the task? Why are we doing it? What's the purpose here? Do we just want a new logo because it looks good? Do we want a new audience? Do we want to grow our audience? So what's the true problem? And what are the opportunities? Who is this thing for? And why should they care? Things like, where will this be used, the product, and when and how? And how do we want the branding story to be remembered and retold? Here's another very wordy slide, I apologize. But again, the purpose, the mission. You want to find out about the personality of the brand. Who's their current audience, and who do they want their audience to be? Some other research might involve, what do people currently think about this brand? And of course, competition is really important. Coca-Cola is always going to say, all right, what's Pepsi doing, of course, as an obvious example. And then after the research, you were going to start doing brainstorming. This looks different to different people. It can be talking with other people, writing out rough ideas, things like word associations where you can make connections and think about juxtaposing different ideas, different visual ideas. You want to think about adjectives and verbs that describe the company or brand or whatever it is and make different analogies. So hopefully you've probably all been in different brainstorming sessions, and again, it looks different, and I'm not going to do a lot on the brainstorming process. If you're a VisCom major, we'll do more of this in the next class, 346, but it's a really important part where you're just dumping out all ideas and there are no bad ideas. And you're not doing visuals yet, but that comes next, and there's a process called thumbnail sketches, and this just means drawing lots and lots and lots of ideas and making them super quick. They can be messy, they're small, but the idea here is quantity, not quality, just quantity, just coming up with ideas, and they can be messy. So here's a student project for Sustainable Carolina. A thumbnail sketch. Of course, there were tons and tons more. A first draft, a second draft, and a final draft here, or a comprehensive. A couple of drafts of the logo. Sustainable Carolina. Yeah, so here's another student project for a logo for Pedal Parlor, which they didn't actually use. It was just a project, but again, lots and lots of sketches, a first draft and a final comprehensive draft. And I have lots of these examples from student projects in the past. So let's talk about logos. Those were obviously all logos, the examples I gave, but the idea process holds true for entire branding systems. What's the big idea? But let's focus just now on logos and what makes a quote-unquote good logo. So there are a number of principles that I would point out, and there are always exceptions, of course. There are great logos that don't conform to these things. But for the most part, logos are really, very effective logos are very, very simple. So think about being able to draw something in a matter of seconds. The Nike swoosh, the Apple logo, even the Instagram logo and things like that. And again, there are logos that are quite intricate and ornate that work well, but for the most part, some of the most iconic and successful logos are very, very simple. Great logos are stylized. We're not drawing. We're not trying to mimic what we actually see in reality. So here are a few different logos related to the idea of a fox. And none of them really look that much like a fox. They're really stylized in different ways, whether it's using Gestalt or having principles of closure or using geometric shapes and those types of things. But they shouldn't, again, we're not working toward trying to make a perfect fox. We're trying to draw the fox in such a way that communicates a tone or a mood or the overall character of a certain brand. I think this is really important. Effective logos are conceptual and clever, often juxtaposing a couple of ideas, 2 or more ideas, and usually or often making use of Gestalt concepts that we've talked about before. So the Cisco logo, sometimes there's these little hidden meanings, uses the San Francisco Bridge because this is a company that comes from San Francisco. You might not notice that at first. Goodwill has both a G and a smiley face. Pinterest has the little pin here. Toblerone has a bear in the negative space of the mountain. Amazon goes from A to Z. And then there's some other ones where you can see a juxtaposition of a few ideas that are really clever. Good logos should be able to render well in a large format and a really, really small format. So logos might end up on something as big as a billboard, and they might be like a centimeter by centimeter on a business card. So it needs to be sizable, scalable, I guess is what I should say. Typically, great logos are not contained in a box or a shape, although, again, there are exceptions. If we go back here, Goodwill is indeed boxed in. Talk about this again and again, but importantly, logos and overall branding should communicate visually the mood, personality, and tone of the company. And then going back to the same screenshot of all these iconic logos, it's important that logos render well in both black and white and in color. So when I say black and white, I'm referring to pure black and pure white, not grayscale, not gradations of black and white. And you'll see, not as often as you would maybe 30 years ago when we were printing more things, black and white printers and so on, but you will still see logos that are rendered in black and white in certain contexts. All right, and that's it for our discussion on branding and the idea process and logos. And I hope that you will look at logos and try and find their hidden meanings if they're good ones. And if you find something great and want to post it on the discussion board, I will give you 5 extra credit points.